what we're going to do is we're going to rank their surrounding situation. So we've done rankings and talked about the individual players, what we thought of them coming out of college, but now it's a different game. I think their situation is going to have a lot to do with how they succeed. I think Trevor Lawrence is probably the only one I would say definitively is going to succeed in any situation, and that situation is Jacksonville. So let's rank the supporting cast. I think they all actually went to reasonable situations, some way better than others. So Blake, who do you think has the worst supporting cast and surrounding roster of these five guys?
So good question. I'm going to preface this by saying I have it into three tiers. I think there's one team in the tier one team in tier two, and then three in the tier three. So the tier three for me is starting with the fifth, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, you can have them 4 or 3. I could honestly understand that, but my thing is this, Urban Meyer has not coached any in the NFL. He's had to stop coaching because of health issues. And that worries me. It really does, because the NFL, especially being a head coach, is one of the most demanding jobs. I mean, you're working, tons of hours. You're nonstop grinding during the season. You're spending a lot of time away from family. And I'm definitely worried about his health. Also, not having coached in the NFL. So that worries me. Also, their O-line is okay. I don't think it's anything special, anything great. They did draft a guy, I believe, in the second round, so that helps. But it's nothing like, the Packers or the Browns. It's not that great. And then their weapons are pretty good. I'll say that. I like their running backs a lot. They have one of the best 1-2 punches, James Robinson. They drafted Travis Etienne. I wasn't a huge fan of the pick, but he is a really good running back, especially as a second, number 2 guy to James Robinson. So that's awesome. And then the receivers, DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault. Those are 2 pretty good guys. Tight end, they don't really have much there, which is a concern. But overall, I do think they're in a reasonable situation. And it's not to say that, they're fifth in their garbage. No, that's not it at all. But I do have some concerns with Urban Meyer and then some of their O-line and tight ends. But what do you got at 5, Vish?
So I'm actually going a different route. I'll give my opinions on the Jaguars supporting cast because I feel like I have a more positive take on their supporting cast than you. But I agree with your tiers, actually. I think there's one team that's definitively better than the other 3. And then I would say there's 3 teams in tier 2, and then there's one team in tier 3. And I think by far, to me, the worst landing spot was Justin Fields to the Chicago Bears. And at first, it starts off with the organization, right? The Chicago Bears have a horrible history with quarterbacks. Quarterbacks just don't succeed there. I mean, I'm going to say that I wouldn't be surprised if Mitchell Trubisky comes out of his 1 year in Buffalo and has a small second act to his career and people go, wow. Like, I'm not saying Trubisky is good, but he wasn't as bad as he looked with the Bears. Quarterbacks just don't succeed there. 2, he went to a place where the coach and the GM are on their final year of their contract. What does that mean? There's a good chance both Nagy and Pace are gone next year, which means Justin Fields is going to have immediately a change in coaching, which we've seen with quarterbacks. Consistency when it comes to head coach and GM helps them a lot, especially early in their career. 3, in terms of surrounding talent, I agree the receivers aren't as bad as I think people think. We both agree Allen Robinson's very good. And then I think I'm high on Darnell Mooney. I think he showed a lot of potential, and I think he's going to look good with Justin Fields. So I'm high on that. But in terms of tight ends, Cole Kmet, they drafted high. Jimmy Graham, I don't know what you can ask from that.
That's
right. He's okay in the red zone. But in terms of their offensive line, I don't think it's very good. In terms of their defense, Roquan Smith, beast. Khalil Mack, beast. Akeem Hicks, I think he's starting to get older. Danny Trevathan, I don't think he's that guy anymore. And in terms of Sean Desai is an absolute question mark. I'm cheering for him, though. Absolutely, I'm cheering for him.
Yes.
But in terms of their corners, I don't think they've addressed anything on the other side of Jalen Johnson. Tevin Jenkins was a solid pick, but they need more on their offensive line than just Tevin Jenkins. And I just don't believe in Matt Nagy, the play caller. For me, this is who Matt Nagy is. Matt Nagy is Dolphins' Adam Gase. He's Adam Gase before people recognize that he's actually a problem, right? Nobody gave Ryan Tannehill the excuse of Adam Gase. They said Adam Gase is this great offensive mind. Remember when he was hired by the Jets, people were like, he's going to fix Sam Darnold. He's brilliant, blah, blah, blah. What happened? That's who Matt Nagy is to me. Right. That's who Matt Nagy is. Their offense, it doesn't make sense to me. They had a nice little thing going, especially David Montgomery finally showed what they were so high on him, and he finally showed something at the end of last year because they ran this kind of McVay Shanahan style offense. And what does Nagy do? He immediately seizes the play calling again, and they're just going to be RPO, 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 trick play without kind of an approach or a game. Like the way their offense attacks defenses just never makes sense to me. It's just a couple of trick plays here, but what's your sustained bread and butter? Can you run the football? Not really that well. Is the RPO kind of your sustained success? I don't know what their offense really does extremely well under Matt Nagy to say that this is it. So for me, I feel bad. Yeah. Everybody knows here how much I love Justin Fields before the draft. It's unfortunate that he went to the Bears. Maybe I'm a little biased here because I'm not the most pro Bears, but I think that's by far the worst landing spot.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess that transitions well for me because I had them fourth. And I think, there is an argument to be made. You could have them last, but here's, I guess, my more positive take on it. Sure, their O-line is not the best, but they had a ton of injuries. They drafted Tevin Jenkins, and they're getting those guys back from injuries. Okay, so their O-line is going to be better than last year. Their weapons are actually not bad. I understand the thing with the tight ends. Like, okay, Jimmy Graham's not good for what he's paid, and, they took Cole Kmet in the second round, but you could find teams with a lot worse tight ends, a la the Patriots last year, the Jags right now. I think their tight ends are all right. Receivers, I really do like them a lot. I like Allen Robinson. I think he's really good. And this is the best quarterback he's ever going to be able to play with. He played with Hackenberg, Blake Bortles, Trubisky. He has had a rough go with quarterbacks. So having him with Fields is exciting to see. Darnell Mooney was really good last year. He just, quarterback play slowed him down is what I think. And then Anthony Miller is still a decent number 3, nothing crazy, but the running back situation's not bad either. David Montgomery's a pretty solid running back if he gets a lot of carries, and Tariq Cohen's, your typical receiving back who's decent. So when I think of that, I'm like, okay, like that's actually a pretty decent supporting cast. Maybe the O-line could be better. Maybe they could have another good receiver, but it could be worse. My issue with them is, like you mentioned, the coaching and the GM, you don't know if they're going to be there. You really just don't. And this, having Nagy and Pace trade some future assets to go get a guy when they could be gone next year and not have to, see the loss of those picks
it's irresponsible.
It's kind of bad. You don't want a guy who's on the hot seat to just be trading away future capital like they did. And I think it was a great trade for them to get a guy at Fields at 11, but the fact remains that having someone who might not be there in a year deal with your future picks is kind of concerning. And like you mentioned, Agreed. The defense, I really don't think their defense upgraded much from the draft. They went pretty heavy O-line, and they didn't have a lot of picks. They didn't go heavy. They went heavy on offense. They lost Kyle Fuller. Akeem Hicks is 32 and has had injuries. Khalil Mack is 30. When one of those guys starts slowing down, I don't think their defense is crazy talented. I like Roquan Smith a lot, but as you mentioned, Danny Trevathan might not be what he was a few years ago. Eddie Jackson's a good safety, but cornerback leaves something to be desired, with Jalen Johnson being kind of the only cornerback that really is, is a good guy. They got rid of Buster Skrine too, who played a lot for them. Fuller's obviously gone. So I'm concerned about their defense. I still think it'll be a pretty good unit, but being able to be like a top 10, top 8 unit, that's where I think probably not. And that's what they need to win.
So they invested right in their offensive line. I'll just touch on them more. They spent 2 picks on their offensive line, 2 tackles. Tevin Jenkins is the name everybody knows. And then they also took Larry Borum from Missouri, right? So he's got a ton of talent. I think the bottom line is that when you look at 2 rookie tackles a position that unless you draft Orlando Pace or Walter Jones or Jonathan Ogden or Trent Williams, it takes a little while to translate. I think Sewell is probably the only guy, in my opinion, in this draft that from day one is just going to dominate. Tristan Wirfs was also a freak, and he was able to do that. Joe Thomas, players like that. But I don't look at either Tevin. I think Tevin Jenkins and Borum will have growing pains. And so that's where I just don't look at anything reliable in their offense for Justin Fields. And their defense to me still remains like, in theory, their defense has been phenomenal the last 3-4 years. I think it's going to start to slow down. We saw how much they struggled with Akeem Hicks not playing. And I don't think you can rely on Akeem Hicks to just be that guy, top to bottom, that he once was. Because like 2 years ago, Akeem Hicks was one of the best 5 techniques in football. He was just dominant. But can he be that still? That's where. So going to my number 4, I'm actually this to me was the tightest question. Number 4, it was between 2 teams, and I'm going to go with Jacksonville. I was considering the Jets earlier today when we considered doing this topic, and then I went with Jacksonville. And the reason I went with Jacksonville is because I'm really high on a lot of things on their team. The problem is that a lot of it's unknown. Like, I think DJ Chark can absolutely be a number 1 receiver in the NFL. We haven't seen DJ Chark with a big-time quarterback like Trevor Lawrence and see him be a number 1 receiver. So that's a question mark to me. I think their offensive line isn't bad. They franchise tagged Cam Robinson, who's been a solid tackle. Juwan Taylor from Florida, who they took a couple years ago, is also a solid tackle. So there's not that bad there. Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones, to me, that's a solid receiving core with DJ Chark. And James Robinson, Carlos Hyde, and Travis Etienne is a solid running back. So it's not bad. I just don't know what their offense is going to look like when you add in Darrell Bevel, Brian Schottenheimer, and Urban Meyer. I have no clue what that's going to project like. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is special, so it could all look great, but we don't know if it's going to be a good offense because we don't know how the offense is really going to look because they're all a little different in terms of what they've done. The big reason I have them above the Bears is I'm really high on what their defense could be. And in terms of what their defense could be, I think it's exciting. I mean, I like Josh Allen. He had 10 sacks his rookie season. I think that he's going to rear back into form. I was a big Kayvon Chason fan. He struggled as a rookie, but I still am huge on the upside. He's only 21 years old. CJ Henderson's a big-time talent. I think he can be a legit number 1 corner. They drafted one more corner. I'm blanking. They drafted a very good player. Did they draft Tyson Campbell? Yeah, they drafted Tyson Campbell, who I was really high on, and they signed Shaq Griffin, so there's talent in their secondary. Andre Sisco, I thought, is a good player, but him coming off his ACL, that's a question mark. And then Miles Jack is one of the best linebackers in the NFL. So that's the one known on their defense. I think that Jacksonville has a lot of really young, talented players in a lot of premium positions. And then you add in Trevor Lawrence. I think there's an opportunity for them to be a playoff team next year because of Trevor Lawrence and all of that. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, they're definitely – yeah, I was maybe a little more down on them mainly due to the Urban Meyer situation. But it's kind of the same story with the Jags is there are a lot of unknowns. But one thing we do know is they have a quarterback who's special.
Right.
And that can solve a lot of these issues.
Right. And I think where we stand is I'm looking at the Jags and saying, oh, look at what all these players could be because they were so good coming out and they're so young. And you're looking at them and saying this is what they are right now. And I'm not sure if that's enough for Trevor Lawrence.
Exactly. Okay. So I think I can move on to my number 3. And that's going to be the New York Jets. I'm higher on them than the Jags and the Bears, like by a decent amount, but not enough to put them into my tier 2 with the other teams. So I've been hearing this. I know you've been hearing this too. It's been in the media. Sam Darnold wasn't the issue. Look what he's been working with. And it's a fair point. You know, they had Gase, didn't have a great O-line. Receivers not there. Running back's not the best. I agree. Totally right. Now they have Saleh, they have LaFleur. We haven't seen them as head coaches, or offense coordinators, but I think they have potential. I like Saleh a lot as a guy. I think he's one of those people that is a great leader, and sometimes that's better than being insanely smart with X's and O's. So I like that. LaFleur's system, he's got like his brother, McVay and Shanahan, he runs that same similar style offense. And I think Zach Wilson will slot into that perfectly. I really do. I think you couldn't ask for a much better scheme fit than that. And then just talking about their roster, receivers, well, they weren't that great last year. Well, what'd they do? Well, They went out and they got Elijah Moore. They went out and they got Corey Davis. They have Jamison Crowder. They have Denzel Mims. Running back, that was a question mark. They drafted Michael Carter, who I think will fit into the scheme and this team insanely well, uber talented. O-line, they said, all right, we don't have the best O-line. Traded up for Elijah Vera Tucker. Awesome pick. Mekhi Becton is an insanely talented tackle. So I like that. Defense-wise, tons of just holes on the roster in general with that. But their D-line's actually pretty solid. Quinnen Williams is awesome. C.J. Mosley's coming back.
Carl Lawson's a beast.
Yeah, I forgot. They signed him as well. And then the safety May, pretty solid. Overall, I just think their offense is a lot more talented than people are giving them credit for. And I trust LaFleur and Saleh maybe more than others do. So I really do think they'll actually be a pretty solid landing spot for Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I have the Jets number 3 as well. I would have, if before the draft, I would have had them as 4 or 5. But you look at number 3. I mean, first of all, Zach Wilson to me is more talented than Sam Darnold. I don't know why Jets fans are so attached to Sam Darnold. Zach Wilson's just more talented, and he's a perfect fit, like you said, to the wide zone offense. He's good in the quick game. He can run RPOs. He played in a wide zone-based offense from the pistol at BYU. They ran a lot of crossing route concepts, which his brother runs a lot of with the Green Bay Packers. So he's a perfect fit from that standpoint for Mike LaFleur's offense. And the difference between them and the Jags is that we know exactly what Mike LaFleur's offense is going to look like. It's going to look like a variation of what his brother and Shanahan are running. So that's a perfect fit. Then you brought up Michael Carter, right? Perfect running back for the system. He's going to be incredible. They got Tevin Coleman, who's a terrific pass protector, and he doesn't fumble. So that's at least a positive. He's no longer an explosive runner. You talked about the receivers. Corey Davis, baller. We both wanted him to go to the Jets in terms of scheme fit, everything, perfect fit. Elijah Moore, awesome. Awesome pick for them. Jamison Crowder, you and I both think he's a lot better than he's been given credit for. So he's good. And right. He's going to be a good player. Denzel Mims has insane talent. I mean, you're talking 6'2", 215, 4.3 speed. He's like Roy Williams from Texas, but we'll see if he realizes that talent, the potential. He was on the way last year. And then the defense, there's question marks. I wish they invested in their secondary more. I mean, again, their offensive line, you mentioned, it's going to be better. Vera Tucker, great pick. Becton, already great player. So the defense, I wish they invested earlier in their secondary, especially their corners. But we know this is going to be primarily a defense that's going to play zone, a lot of quarters coverage, a lot of cover 3. So their corners don't have to be the greatest. They just have to be competent in playing in zone coverage. Their defensive line, Quinnen Williams, just a beast, an absolute monster, terrific player. Carl Lawson, very good. I think their defense is going to be better, especially next year with Robert Saleh. And you look at the whole picture, it's a really young, talented team. They might not be perfect around Zach Wilson this year, but they're building for something that could be really good around Zach Wilson, who has a ton of talent over the next few years.
And I think they learned from the Darnold mistake of maybe not having the most talented weapons, maybe not having the best O-line with what they had last year. And they said, we are going to make sure our quarterback is in the best position possible to succeed before we, invest heavily in our defense, which, over the past few years, they really have drafted heavy. Defensively, you think of Quinnen Williams, Leonard Williams going early. There's a couple guys there, but they've got a lot of offensive talent in this draft. You think of 4 picks, I guess 3 picks surrounding Wilson and Tucker, Elijah Moore, Carter Williams. Like, those are all who I think to be good guys and will fit well in the system, and then they signed other guys too. So they're doing their best to make sure that if Zach Wilson's a good quarterback, he can show his talents.
Absolutely. And just real quick before we go to number 2 and number 1, let's just recap the rankings. So I have the Bears 5, the Jaguars 4, the Jets 3. Blake has the Jaguars 5, the Bears 4, and the Jets 3. So now let's get into it. Blake, I'm pretty sure I know where you're going with number 2. I'm pretty sure our number 2 and number 1 is the same, but who is the number 2 landing spot?
Yeah, so this is my tier 2 team. I think they're a notch above the tier 3 teams in a sense that just the organizational structure and sliding into that team is probably easier just because of the sustained success. And that's going to be Mac Jones to the Patriots. Insane. They have a really good O-line. They have, I think, to be a really good running game overall. with McDaniels.
Damian Harris.
Damian Harris. I'm blanking on the other running backs. They still have Sony Michel, I believe, but Damian Harris is really the guy who I think is special. And they signed 2 tight ends, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. They didn't have good tight ends last year. Now they have 2 pretty above average ones, I'd say. Receivers is where I'm like, okay, they don't have really much there still. But the fact that they can run the ball so well is what leads me to believe they're going to be special. And then I think, okay, they have Bill Belichick. They have Josh McDaniels. That's probably the best head coach, offensive coordinator combo maybe in the league, you could argue. I wouldn't take anyone over Bill as a head coach. So they have that. And then just the Patriots organization is obviously, run by the Kraft family and has been pretty good for the last 20 years. So I'll have them as my number 2. You can touch more on the defense if you want, Vish. I think you have them as your number 2 as well.
Yeah, I do, and I wanted to touch on their defense. That's primarily why they're number 2 for me. Their defense is going to be really good. The one thing they were missing on their defense was size on their defensive line. Well, boom, Christian Barmore just falls to them at pick 38. It's convenient how that happens, huh? Mac Jones is a perfect fit for what they do offensively. Josh McDaniels is obviously really creative. We know they're going to be able to run the football. We saw how good their run game was at the end of last year with Cam Newton. And, I don't know if Mac Jones will start next year because I still believe in Cam Newton. Maybe I'm crazy, but I still believe in Cam Newton, but we'll see. But in terms of the run game, we know with Damian Harris, it's going to be good. I think the receivers, Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, are fine, but I think their tight ends with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry are really good. And I think that makes a big difference because we know how creative Josh McDaniels is in getting into heavy personnel, getting base defense on the field, and then finding matchups he wants to exploit. So I think we're going to see a little more of that. But yeah, from the standpoint of the Patriots in terms of what they provide for Mac Jones, coaching is as good as it gets. Offensive weapons, I would say the tight ends are great. The running back is good. The offensive line is very good. And the receivers are solid, but not the best. That would be the only spot. And then they have a really good defense. So I think that in terms of fit, like Mac Jones is going to a really, really great spot because the Patriots have kind of very underratedly built this thing back up where they can make a run over the next 2 years at a Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. And they have Mac Jones for cheap for at least 4 years, maybe 5 if they take his 5th-year option. So the window's back open for the Patriots. I'm a little bummed out at seeing that. It's nice seeing some new teams, but they don't have Tom anymore, so that's always a little nice knowing. But we'll see how Mac Jones turns out. Good situation. Now, Vish, who do you have as your number 1 landing spot?
Yeah, this is a no-brainer. This is the Niners. And I jokingly tweeted out after the draft like crap. I liked Justin Fields and Mac Jones. I had them ranked above Trey Lance solely because I was so scared of some things with Trey Lance. Obviously, Lance might be the most talented of them all, but there were some things that scared me. But now I'm just going to look like an idiot because Lance is going to by far a better situation. And it looks like I think Lance really can succeed. I mean, you just look at the mental makeup and all of that. He just looks like a guy that's going to succeed also in that situation. So I was like, man, I'm going to look really, really stupid over the next 10 years. Yeah. But that's okay because if Trey Lance is winning on the Niners, I don't mind being the biggest idiot out there. So that's okay with me. But yeah, it's 100% the Niners. The Niners offensive line was maybe their only thing that isn't above average. And it's now above average. I told you, Aaron Banks, I love that pick for the Niners in terms of fit into the wide zone, in terms of size, in terms of run pass blocking, just exactly what they need. Hopefully he can slot right there in at right guard. McGlinchey, I know a lot of people dislike McGlinchey and because McGlinchey has a lot of bad moments in pass protection, but McGlinchey is still fine, and he's a very good run blocker, and so there's some things he does well. Trent Williams, obviously the best left tackle in the NFL. I think Alex Mack is going to help them a lot, so you have a good offensive line there. Brandon Ayuk, we know how special he is. Deebo Samuel, very special. George Kittle, arguably the best tight end in the NFL. Now you add Trey Sermon to the run game. You add Kyle Juszczyk. You add Trey Lance to the run game. So they have this outstanding offense. And then you go to the defense. You go Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Jimmy Ward. Maybe you get something out of D Ford, Samson Ebukam, Javon Kinlaw. It is just a loaded defense. Jason Verrett. So there's a ton on this team where it's like it's set up for a quarterback to succeed. And we see Jimmy Garoppolo when he plays, he succeeds. And now you add a more talented player in Trey Lance. I see no way Lance isn't going to succeed. And this is by far the best landing spot for any of these quarterbacks. And I would say it might be the best single landing spot we've ever seen for a quarterback. When you add in Kyle Shanahan, who we haven't even talked about, who makes the game so easy for his quarterbacks, I don't think we've seen a guy get picked in the top 5 that goes to a spot like this. This is unprecedented, in my opinion.
I'm totally with you. And they got the 12th pick mainly due to injuries. I think a lot of people thought that had their roster remained healthy, they would be a playoff team again. I was one of those people. Clearly, that didn't happen. They had an insanely long list of people with IR, COVID, or just other injuries. And like you mentioned, I would compare their pass. I would take their pass catchers and running back situation and compare it to any of these other landing spots for any of the other teams and say, I'd rather have these guys. And then I think, okay, what offensive mind would I want to have the most? Well, McDaniels is pretty good, but Kyle Shanahan's kind of in a league of his own compared to the other guys. So yeah, I would take him too. Their defense, still a few question marks maybe with the secondary, but overall it's a solid defense. And then you mentioned the O-line too. Williams is back. I don't think he's the best tackle in the league, although I do think he's a very good one. And then they signed Alex Mack. They drafted a guard who, as you mentioned, he looks like a beast, and he's from Notre Dame. And you know, if he's from Notre Dame, he's probably going to end up being good if he's a guard. Only kidding there, but yeah, they clearly are heavily invested in the O-line, which I always love. And their pass catchers are great. Maybe the Trey Sermon pick wasn't what I thought they should have done, but Trey Sermon, Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., that's a good stable of running backs because Shanahan likes a different one every week, it seems like. I think they are loaded compared to these other teams.
Right. In my opinion, the only quibble you can have with the Trey Sermon pick is that you didn't like that they traded up for a running back in round 3 when you felt that they should have traded up for a corner. But the player itself, right? We saw Trey Sermon last year for Ohio State. He is a beast. He is a beast. And I think he brings a little bit of what the Niners need, a down in and down out bruiser. I think they're going to be, you throw in the guard, you throw in Trey Sermon, you throw in Trey Lance, how physically imposing he is. The Niners are going to be very physical next year. And then they have a physical defensive line with Javon Kinlaw and DJ Jones and Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa. It is physical. They're going to be a really physical football team on both lines of scrimmage. And yeah, there's no better situation. I mean, when you have an all-pro tight end, a receiver with mega potential in Brandon Ayuk, a receiver in Deebo Samuel, who we've seen single-handedly win games. We saw it last year versus the Rams. You just get him the ball and he carries 5 people and wins you the game. You throw in Kyle Shanahan's play calling. You throw in a Hall of Fame left tackle in Trent Williams. You have Nick Bosa, who's a top 3 edge player in the NFL. Fred Warner, who's a top 2 middle linebacker in the NFL. You throw in all of this, like, there's too much not to succeed. And that's why Trey Lance by far is in the best situation. I think we agree on that.
Yeah,